Hi students, I wanted to show you a quick solution to the comma-separated values parsing problem that I gave you. As it said in the packet, you want three classes. You want main, which is going to run everything, and then you're going to store your data in two different classes, one called stock record, one called stock data. Stock record is intended to store all of the information associated with a single line of the input file. Here's the input file representing the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So each line here represents information about the Dow Jones on a particular date. So stock record is supposed to encapsulate all of this information. So each new line will be a new stock record object. Alright, where do we store all of the stock record objects? Because we've got a whole lot of them here. That's what stock data is for. So stock data is supposed to provide a structure for storing a whole list of the stock record objects. And it's also going to expose several methods that we can use to ask about particularly interesting stock records. So we could ask about the record that has the highest high, or the lowest low, or the largest difference between opening and closing, and so on. Alright, let's do it. So here it says in the packet, let's find the packet. Okay, so here it says in the packet, your main class should look like this. You should create a new stock data object, and then you should ask your stock data object to load data from a file, and you give it the file path. And then we can do things with it. Alright, fine. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it straight into main. Oops. And paste it straight into main. Alright, so I've already got a stock data object, but it doesn't recognize this method. So let's create the method. Alright, here's the method. How's this method supposed to work? It reads the file in file path. I'm going to call this file path. Creates stock record objects and adds them to records. Okay. So I also showed you code for how you can create the load data from file method, so let's look at that. Alright, it's something like this. So you're going to try to load the file, and you're going to loop through it a bunch of times, and you're splitting the results on a comma, and then you're going to parse each of those numbers, you're going to parse each of those strings into an appropriate number, and then eventually you're going to build a stock record. So now I'm going to paste this code into load data from file. I need to import scanner and file reader, and I need to finish building the rest of this. Okay, so I've commented out the line where I'm building a new stock record because I don't actually have anything in my stock record class yet. So let's see what we might need in the stock record class. I think we need, let's make our fields private, a low value, a high value, an opening, and a closing value. I think those are all the values we need. I'm going to auto-generate everything here. So getters and setters, as well as a constructor. And I want to construct it with all those values. I don't need to call the super constructor. Alright, so that should be my stock record class. Let's pay attention to the order here. Low, high, opening, closing. Okay, so here back in data, when I'm creating my stock record, I want to say, oh, I don't have a date associated. I forgot to store the date. Alright, let's go back here and add a date. And I'll make getters and setters for the date. Alright. So stock record, I'll give it the date first. Then it said low, I forgot already. Low, high, opening, closing. Low, high, opening, closing. So now that means that I've got to create actual variables to give to the constructor. So I've got open and I've got high, and now I need I'm going to call opening, and I've got to have a low, and I've got to have a closing. Okay, but I don't know what order they appear in the array that came from splitting the line. So let's look at the file. So it looks like this is array element 0, array element 1 is opening, array element 2 is the high value, which is correct for what I have so far. Array element 3 is the low value. Great. So I'll say results 3. Closing is the one directly after low. So results 4 will be the closing value. Alright, so here, so far, let's just review what we've done. I'm looping through the file. I have the scanner get the next line of the file as a string. I split it on comma. So now I have this array of strings that represents each substring between the commas, which are the numbers that I care about. I'm parsing the numbers I need, and then I give them to the constructor as arguments so that I can construct a new stock record that corresponds to this line that I just read. Alright, what am I going to do with the stock record once I created it? I'm inside stock data. Stock data's job is to hold all of the records, so I'm trying to add it to a list of all the stock records. So up here, let's say private array list stock record records. And now I'll need a constructor, public stock data. My constructor takes no parameters, takes no arguments. Sorry, has no parameters, takes no arguments. I gotta initialize records, however. So records equals new array list stock record. Done. Okay, so now I'm adding the record I just created to my list of records. This is not going to be the most efficient way to get what we want out of this class eventually, but that will be in a second video. Alright, so I'm adding the records. What do I need to do now? Whenever you finish something, it's usually best to check to make sure if it's doing what you think it should be doing. So I want some way of verifying at least that it's loaded some data. So I'm going to add a getter method here that lets me check that. I'm going to have get number of records. So I'll return records.size, because that would be nice to be able to ask it how many records are there. And I'm just going to provide an interface directly to this array list. So I'm going to call it get record number, and I'll just return records I. So that way I can just check a couple of them. Oh, sorry, get I. Okay. So let's take a look. Stock data dot get number of records. So I'm just going to run it and see what it says. Okay, so it says the system cannot find the specified file data stocks.csv. Cool, and I know why. Because this is not the location where my file is. Mine is actually inside data, but it's called Dow Jones Industrial Average.csv. So let's try it again. Nope, that's not what it's... great. So here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing I changed it here, but for some reason the error message is still trying to read stocks.csv, and that reminded me of another thing I forgot to do. So here inside stock data, here's my load data from file. This file path is getting assigned to the string file path, but then look where I actually read my file from. I completely ignore the input to my method, and I just go ahead and read it from here. So that's clearly not what I want to do. Alright, so now I'm actually reading from the file path that the client code is giving me. So let's run it again. Error for input string open. Okay, so now I'm thinking, what does that mean? Error for input string open. and I'm thinking, where does it say open? Where is open an input string? Back in my file, it looks like here's open, and I'm realizing, I don't want to parse this first line of my file because it doesn't actually have numbers I care about. This is just for humans to read. So I need to skip this line and start on this line. All right, how do I skip a line? Well, I know when I say scanner.nextLine, that will read the line and move on to the next one. So I think I want to say scanner.nextLine before I start this loop. And I don't actually care what the result is because I'm throwing that line away anyway. All right, let's keep going. Great. So now I'm reading 19,000 records. Okay. Do you see how useful it is to debug as you go, though? If I had written the whole rest of this stuff, it would be a lot less clear where the errors might be occurring. They could be occurring anywhere, but because I only had one thing happening, it was a lot easier for me to go in and figure out what was going wrong. Okay, where are we now? So I'm reading the values. I guess all I need to do now is enable these sorts of methods, the get largest open record and so on. Let's see in the problem statement what those are supposed to say. Alright, so I created stock data, yep. I created stock record, yep. Alright, so largest high, lowest low. Let's do those two. So here in stock data, I'll say public stock record get largest high. It doesn't require an argument because it already has all the stock records inside it, so it's just going to look through them all. Let's write a for each loop. So stock record object R, and I'm reading it out of the records list. So again, the way for each loops work is this is a list, and this for statement is going to loop through each member of this list and assign it one at a time to this variable R. I guess I'll call it record. Alright, so I need to check to see which is the one with the largest high. So I'm going to create a temporary stock record object called highest, which I'll set to be null to start with. Actually, let's set it to be records. Let's set it to be the first record. Because if the first record happens to be the one with the highest high, great, we're done. If it doesn't, it'll get replaced when we loop through here. Alright, so I want to know if the record I'm looking at right now, because remember record is going to loop through each member of this, so if this record's high is bigger than my highest record's high, then I found the new highest record. So I should reassign highest to be the record I'm looking at right now. So as I loop through now, I'm checking each one. Is this higher than my highest so far? If it is, I replace it. So at the very end of this process, I should be able to return highest. And let's see if it works. Is that what I called it? Great. Oh yeah, so we didn't make a toString. This is what it looks like when you display an object where you have not overridden toString, because this is the default toString from the parent class. So let's go to stock record and make a nice toString. Public string toString. And I'm just going to return each of the fields. Alright, running it again. Cool, there's the high, low, opening, closing. This high certainly seems pretty high. This is obviously not a way of checking whether you have actually gotten the highest high or not. We could look in the file, you could open it up in Excel, and you could check it. I don't want to do that right now, I just want to keep programming. So I said it once and I'll say it again. This is not a terribly efficient method. This is running in big O of n, where n is the number of records in stock data, because I have to loop through every record to find the highest. We can improve this class as a whole by making this method run in big O of 1. We can make it run in constant time, but that will be in a second video. All right, so for get, what did I call this thing? Get lowest low. It's the same idea, except this time I'll pretend the first record is the lowest, and I want to see if the low value of the lowest is less than the low value of the lowest one we've seen so far. And if it is, we'll reassign it lowest, and there I've created it. Sorry, this is record. Okay. So let's test that method. So highest high and lowest low look like they're exactly the same. This should make us suspicious. Let's debug it. Okay, so it looks like the problem is here. So I'm asking, is my lowest so far's low value smaller than the new record I'm looking at? That's backwards. I want to know, is the new record I'm looking at potentially the lowest value I've seen so far? So I want to see, is the new record's low value smaller than the low value of the lowest one I've seen so far? And if the answer is yes, I know record must be the new lowest, so then I assign it. So this was just backwards. That makes sense. Great, and now we've got a completely different situation. Okay. Let's look back at the assignment. So record with the largest difference between high and low and largest difference between opening and closing. Alright, so I'm going to make another method. Get largest opening closing difference. And I'm returning a stock record again. And I'm going to call this largest. Here, you know what? In Eclipse, you can do Alt-Shift-R when you're over a variable name, and it will change them all at the same time. So I'm calling this largest. I'm looping through all the records, except now what do I want to check? I don't want to check the low value. I want to check largest.getHigh minus largest.getLow, because that's the difference between the opening and closing value. And I want to know if this is larger. Nope. Well, let's do that in a second. So then I'm going to look at the difference between the high and the low for record. Oh, wait, this is opening and closing, so I don't want get high. I want get opening and get closing. The problem doesn't really specify whether the magnitude between opening and closing is supposed to be larger, or whether or not we care if the difference between opening and closing was going up or going down. I think I just care what was the largest difference overall. So I'm actually going to look at the absolute value between these two things. So I'm looking at the absolute value of the difference between opening and closing for the largest one I've seen so far versus the one I'm looking at right now. And I want to know if the one I'm looking at right now is bigger, that means it must have a larger difference between opening and closing. Therefore, it should be my new largest. So that makes sense. Let's test the method. So here's opening is 10, 922, 10305. Doesn't seem like a huge difference. And then the next method is just going to work analogously. So the last method I'm supposed to create is largest difference between O. Alright, so I did opening and closing, so let's do high and low. So now I just want the difference between high and low. And let's just double check to make sure everything else still makes sense. So since I'm still looking for the largest difference, it makes sense to see if the new record I'm looking at has a larger difference than the largest one I'd seen so far. All right, that checks out. Oops, let's try it now. So get largest high-low diff. So here, yeah, this is a pretty big difference between high and low, just sort of intuitively by looking at the numbers in the table. All right, so I think that's a full solution now. Check out the next video to see how we can improve it a little bit and look for some fixes.